So you come across a job that requires Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, Microsoft Server type of experience. You really want this job, but you don't have the experience. That's okay. Don't give up on that job. You can still learn this type of stuff and get this job that you want by setting up a computer lab and having hands-on experience like that. So this is the link here, and if you need this link, you can let me know in the comment below and I'll gladly share the link with you. Also, I will put it as a first comment that is pinned by me. So let's get to it. We're going to click on the download link. So I clicked on the download link and we're going to pick the first thing here. It says download lab environment. And then we're going to click again, download lab environment, which is a zip format. We are downloading right now and the size of this is roughly 24 gigabytes. They are installed in Hyper-V. Now Hyper-V is part of Windows operating system, however you do have to enable it. Now before you use Hyper-V, make sure that you remove any other virtual machine software like Oracle, VirtualBox or anything like that. The reason is because you can't share extensions, hardware extension, meaning like a network, hard drive, all of these hardware extensions that are required by a virtual machine software that has to extend into it. So how do we enable Hyper-V in your computer? Well, you have to go to Windows Features, turn Windows Features on or off. And once this comes up, we're going to have an option to select Hyper-V, which is right here in the middle, right? And if we click the little add button, we can see what's installed. So I'm just going to select Hyper-V. So while we are looking at this setting here for the services, the reason this other one is actually grayed out, and this is very important, that means that virtualization service is not enabled. So this hypervisor stuff, that means you have to go to your BIOS and enable that setting for your CPU. So you have to go to BIOS and enable virtualization. Now it might be called something else on your computer, but make sure to enable any virtual stuff when it comes to emulation inside of your BIOS. Let me know if you have any questions in regards to this in the comment below and I'll certainly assist you with that. So I'm going to click OK. I want to show you that this is as simple as this when it comes to Hyper-V. Once we reboot the computer, Hyper-V is going to be enabled and then we're going to be able to install our virtual machines, virtual labs. All right, reboot. All right, let's see what we got. So here is our downloaded lab. So we're going to right click and then extract all, right? We're going to extract all. I'm going to extract it in the same folder and nowhere else. But when we install everything, I'm going to try to put it on that standalone 120 gigabyte hard drive. All right. So it's unzipped now and available for us to run the setup. And you can see on the disk size, it's about 25 gigabytes. And here is our setup.exe. Watch this. So the one way to get around this is to click more info and run anyway. Since we know, that's funny. I just find that hilarious. You know, I've installed this a couple of times already and I've never seen that come up. Never, never. And look, it's Microsoft product, but they don't recognize it. Go figure. Anyways, we're going to click next. So when I click next, there's going to be one thing that we have to set up. Well, after we agree to this, I'm going to click next. By the way, this is a 90-day evaluation. 90-day evaluation. So we have 90 days to use this. It's plenty of time for you to learn. Now, here we go. This is airing out. I'm going to cancel out of this. Go back to turn Windows features on or off. Okay, so normally that should be like a check mark. All right. Let's make sure that, here we go, Hyper-V services. So I'm going to install this real quick. Sorry about that. Normally, if you just do a check mark, it should be fine. But if you have any issues, now you know how to fix it. So I'm going to apply these changes and we're going to have to reboot one more time. Sorry. We're back. We have rebooted. I'm going to open up Hyper-V this time. So we're going to go to Action again, Virtual Switch Manager. And it's going to let us do it now. So it's going to be the very first thing up top here where it says New Virtual Network Switch. And that's what it was looking for when it was stuck like that. And make sure you select External. And we're going to create a virtual network. And I'm just going to, you can name it whatever you want, but I'm just going to leave it at New Virtual Switch. Leave everything as default. Select Apply. And then OK. I wonder if I'll have to reboot one more time. It's these extensions that are, here we go. So it disconnected my, which makes sense. It disconnected my remote desktop session that I was using to connect to this computer. It just had to disconnect me for a moment and bring me back up. But now we have the virtual switch enabled. So I'm going to close this now, and now the setup should continue. It's good to learn. All right, come up with, in case you have this problem, now you know how to fix it. And it's a good thing in one hand, on one hand, that it came up, so that way if it didn't and you happen to get that problem yourself, then you wouldn't be able to install this. And here it is. Now it's ready to be provisioned, so I'm just going to click next. It says it takes about 20 minutes. Well, hold on. I wanted to point it to something else. Hold on just a moment. I think it's going to want to install it. See, try to install it locally there. That's not where I wanted. I'm going to do cut. So make sure you move the files to the disk that you want to use for this. So I'm going to use it to my virtual machine disk that I have dedicated for it. I'm going to do copy pasta on it. It's just me trying to be funny. It's copy paste, right? And so yeah, just keep that in mind. It's going to install the virtual machines within the folder where you extracted it at. So everything is there now. So all we have to do now is open up Hyper-V. So I'm going to open up Hyper-V Manager. I'm going to run it as administrator. And the reason for that is very important. If you're not logged in as administrator, it's just going to come up blank. Otherwise, you won't be able to see any of these virtual machines that were installed. So if you don't run it as administrator, then this will be blank. All right, so we have a couple of different things running. We have a client that's Windows 11 client. I also have Windows 10 clients that are part of this lab. And we also have a machine that's called DC1, which stands for Domain Controller. This is what has the Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, and etc. And then we've got iNet running, which controls our network here. All right, so what we're going to show you first is the domain controller. So here's the virtual machine of the domain controller. So we're going to log into it. All right, we're going to log into this one here, and then we're going to open up Windows Administrative Tools and start from there. But we're going to concentrate on tech support type of things, which is Active Directory users and computers, DHCP, DNS, possibly Event Viewer. Well, we'll see. We're just going to go in order and see what comes up, what kind of issues come up, and we're going to deal with those. Possibly printers as well, printer management, and we're going to keep going as much as I can for this one long session. So this is going to be a crash course, if you will. Here is our client, Windows 11 client, and we're going to log into it with a username that's already inside of Domain Controller and see if this works. Now, keep in mind, in order for us to use the domain credentials, meaning the credentials from the Active Directory, this computer needs to be part of the same domain. And we can tell that it already is, where it says here sign into corp. That means that that's the name of our domain. So this computer has been joined into a domain, and I will show you where you can also check that. But again, it needs to be part of the domain, so you can use those domain credentials in order to log into it. So let's go into our Active Directory here, users and computers, and we're going to pick just a user that's within here. So we're going to pick test user 4. Why not? We're going to use test user 4, and then we're going to see if we can log into it. So we're going to type in test user 4, and then I'm going to type in the password that's set for it. And here is an error. It says here, to sign in remotely, you need the rights to sign into through desktop remote services. By default, members of the remote desktop users group have this right. So I want you to keep in mind what it says here. By default, members of the remote desktop users group have this right. So this group that they're talking about here is actually a group that's on the client itself. And we're going to make that change. All right, we're going to do that. If the group you're in If the group you're in doesn't have this right, or if the right has been removed from the desktop users group, you need to be granted this right manually. So of course you can apply these rights with creating a security group that would allow these remote desktop access, this and that, but we're going to do it manually just to show you how this makes sense. So again, what this is telling us is that I cannot log into this computer now because this session, and I want to minimize the other one, the domain controller, so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This session here for this client, for this Windows client, is actually considered a remote desktop session because we are using a virtual machine, and this is just how it's set up. So it's the same difference as if I was to pull up a remote desktop. Matter of fact, let me pull up remote desktop on the server machine. So remote desktop connection. This is the same thing when it comes to the access as what we're doing here. However, we're not allowed to do that with test user 4, which is here. This test user 4 is not allowed to do so. All right, well, let's make it so that we can do that, so that test user 4 is allowed to do so. So how can we do that? Well, what we're going to do, we're going to pull up this HYD client, this Windows 11 computer. We're going to find it inside of Active Directory, and then we're going to manage it and make those adjustments as so. All right, so we're going to go into the computers here, and we're going to find client 1, and here it is. This is the client 1. We're going to right click it, and we're going to select manage. We're going to manage settings that are on that computer from here, from the Active Directory, because this computer is part of the Active Directory, and that's the whole point of it as well. So that way you can manage these client computers that are part of Active Directory and also part of the domain controller, meaning this whole thing. Now I know we're getting an error here where it says event viewer computer cannot be connected, but it actually can be. It's just that the way this lab is set up, it kind of shows these false errors. Anyways, here it is. It popped up behind this. So I'm just going to minimize it. And right now we are managing the things that are on that client. The same thing can be viewed if we were inside of the client. Let's say we logged in with a different account. We're just doing this remotely. And I'll show you how that looks like on the client. It will look the same, except you're doing it on the client. Right now I'm doing it remotely. I'm remotely connected to it. So if I expand this, you can see right now computer management. And what is the computer management in here? We are connected to the client 1 that's on this domain. So in order to make these changes, we're going to go to groups. So we're going to expand local users and groups. Again, we're doing this on the remote computer. And then we're going to select the groups. And remember, the error was saying that this ID, test user 4, needs to be part of remote group, remote desktop users and remote management users. For those reasons, we're going to have to modify these groups that are on the local computer. So we're going to double click remote desktop users. So we're going to now click add. We're going to type in test user 4. We're going to select check name, and there it is. It shows up at test user 4. We're going to click OK. We're going to click apply. And now test user 4 has access, remote desktop access to this computer. We have to do the same thing when it comes to remote management users. So same thing, test user 4, check name, click OK, click apply, and then click OK. And there you go. That's how you do it. Now we should be able to log into that computer, no problem, because we are now part of remote desktop users for that computer. All right, so we're going to try it one more time. What was it? Test user 4. All right, so now that we're inside, we're remotely logged into this. Let's see what happened at the local level. So in Windows 11, if you right-click the Start button, this is where majority of things are when it comes to administration. Icon for the Start button is a safe bet for you to find all these settings in Windows 11 in case you're not familiar with this. So what is it that we've done on the domain controller remotely for this computer. We did computer management, right? So therefore we're going to select computer management, and this takes us to the same place that we looked at remotely, except we are doing it on the computer itself. So if we expand local users and groups here, select the groups, remote desktop users, we can see that the test user 4 is now added in here. So that's great. Same thing for remote management. There it is. So that is perfectly fine. All right, so let's talk about next thing, and that is, let's say we cannot access this client 1 computer. So it's literally called client 1, and again, if we open up Active Directory users account, we can see now that that is part of it, right? It's part of it here, but what if we can't ping it? What if we can't reach it over the domain? Well, we can check a couple of different things, and one of them is DHCP and the other one is DNS. So let's look at a couple of different examples that you may come across. So let's open up a command line here, cmd, and let's say I type in ping client 1 and I hit enter, and it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. There is no response, and it would look like something like this. So I'm just going to delete one here just so you can see what would happen. This happens if you mistype the name as well. So I'm just going to hit enter so you can see that this is the error that you get if you cannot reach the client computer using its host name, using its computer name, also known as workstation name, which you should be able to do, assuming that the DNS and the DHCP server are working properly. But we're going to just do ping client 1. And by the way, I just hit up arrow to basically bring up what I already typed in. So that way so you don't have to type it again. And I'm going to hit enter. And now we can see that there's a response from client 1. So that's that same computer that we've accessed, which is this Windows 11 computer. So we can reach it from this server and probably from everything else that's connected to the domain, right? So, but what if you're getting this type of response, but you still can't see $sign to it, for example, if you can't connect to it, if there's an issue with DNS, for example. So let's say you're trying to do this, you're trying to get inside the computer so that way you can remotely do something. So you would do // client 1, and you would do / and then you would see $sign, meaning that you want to get inside of the root of C for this remote computer so you can go inside and do something. And we can obviously get to it immediately. So right now we are at what I like to call, we are backdooring into that computer remotely. So if somebody, for example, wanted something that copied to this computer, you can just go in and copy it, whatever it is, move files, make changes, this and that. You can do the same thing if you're trying to do some remote management. So for example, let's do registry editor. You can connect to it remotely to that computer by going to here. I'm sorry, you have to actually, there it is. You have to make sure computer selected, then go to connect network registry. So it's network located registry, in this case registry that's on remotely located, which is client 1. We're going to connect to registry on the client 1. We're going to check name and see how it does underline. That means it found it. We're going to click OK. And I know we're getting this error because things need to be set up, but that's okay. We're going to check on those things. So that's one way you could do it. Let's see what else. So you can manage, obviously, we've shown that already. And if you go to computer management, so this is another way of actually connecting to it. And if you go to action, connect to another computer, you can also type in client 1, check name, click OK, and then connect to it, and now you're remotely managing it here again. So that's just another way of doing it. I'm going to cancel out of that. Here we go. You can see client 1, computer management, blah, blah, blah. But if it's not working, right? If it's not working, so you have to check a couple of different things, and that main thing I would check would be DNS if you can't reach it. So how could you also see if another computer is using this IP address? So let's say you're getting this record of it, which is client 1 is located at 10.0.0.0. 110, right? So we can check in DNS to see if indeed that's the record of it, right? That's one way to do it. So we can go inside of DNS. But what if we still can't reach it? What if there is some kind of issue with the DNS where you are suspecting that the client is not actually at this IP address? So we can double check this by doing ping. You type in ping -a, which basically does a reverse, and then we're going to type in that IP address 00.110. So when I hit enter, what I should get is a result for client 1. You see how it says here pinging client 1 corp blah blah blah. In this case we are pinging the IP address, but we want to know what the client name is. So it's basically doing a reverse. So this will tell us whether indeed the client 1 is using this IP address, just to confirm. So if I hit enter on here, we're going to get a response, hopefully. There it is. It took a bit, but it did it. And see, right now it tells you that it's pinging client 1. See the comparison here? It's pinging client 1 that is located at this IP address that we've just pinged. So we did ping the IP address and the response telling us that we pinged the client 1, which is a confirmation, double confirmation that there is no issue with the DNS when it comes to forwarding of this IP address. And here's for comparison. It says here pinging client 1 at the domain, but we were actually pinging over here the IP address, which we were pinging the DHCP server to get a response to tell us whether the client 1 is indeed using this IP address. All right, so this confirms that everything is fine, but if this comes back with, for example, client 2, client 3, or something else, that means that DNS is not properly routing the IP addresses. It's not properly forwarding the IP addresses. So where is this happening? Well, it's happening inside of the DNS manager. So we just said it's forwarding these IP addresses and host names to where it's supposed to be. So for those reasons, we're going to expand forward lookup zone. So we're going to expand this, and then we've got a couple of different, or I should say 3 different domains that are set up here. We're going to see which one this is. It's corp.contoso.com. So naturally, we're going to expand this one, right? That's the one. So if we expand this one, or click on it, I should say, we can see that the client 1 is listed in here and has a record. This is what the DNS uses as the record to provides us with these results and forwarding of the IP addresses for the client 1. So here's the record of it. Without this record, the pinging the client 1 would not work. You would not be able to access it by just simply typing in client 1 $. You would have to type in, otherwise you would have to type in this IP address just to prove it to you that this is what's happening. So I'm just going to do, while I'm inside of this client 1, I'm going to just create a text document and say proof of forwarding, right? So right now you can see that we are network connection client 1, and we can reach it because DNS works. But if we replace this with the IP address and hit enter, you can see it takes us to the same thing. And this is how you would go around the DNS issue, assuming that you know for sure that this IP address is indeed for that client, that host name, that workstation name. I hope that's making sense. I tried my best to explain it so it's easy to understand. So again, you got to have the record of it in the DNS for it to work by just typing in client 1. Otherwise, you have to use the IP address, which is part of the DHCP server, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, which assigns the IP addresses. Just to kind of tie it all together for this. All right. And we have our domain. The DHCP setup is set up on domain DC1, which is the name of the server, but DC stands for domain controller. You can name it whatever you want. .corp.conteso.com, and this is IP version 4. How do we know? Because it is, otherwise it would be IP version 6. So we're going to expand that. We're going to expand the scope, meaning the range of the IP addresses that are being used for this server. And then we're going to look at address leases. And here it is. We have that client 1 running in the background, and for those reasons the lease is set up to show. And here's that IP address, right? So this is the DHCP handling the IP address, and the DNS is handling the naming, forwarding of the names on the network, right? So without these two, the DNS would not work properly, and a lot of other things wouldn't work properly. All right. So to reiterate, we've got ping client 1, and we can do so because DNS knows where client 1 is. So if we go to DNS, DNS tells us that the client 1 is at this IP address here, and this IP address is coming from the DHCP server because DHCP server has assigned that IP address to that. We can also, remove this. We can delete this. It will come back on its own. So if I do this, I can delete it. Yeah, I can delete it, and I can just do a refresh, and it's going to come back. If I do a renew, so let's go back to the client itself. It should do it automatically here, like pretty much immediately. But I want to show you here. See, right now it's not connected because I just killed that lease. So it's not letting me in at... Alright, so it's not refreshing right now. That's okay. You can see here that we don't have connection on client 1 suddenly. That's okay. If we do a reboot of this machine, it will get a new IP address as soon as we reboot this machine. And we can see this happening on the DHCP server. We just have to refresh it. It's going to assign a new IP address. It may take a bit because I'm rebooting it here. And it's on Hyper-V, so everything's a little bit slower because it's all virtualized. And some things admittedly don't work right with Hyper-V, but either way. Alright, so now the machine has rebooted. It should have acquired without having to reboot on a normal situations, but this is a virtual machine. Anyway, so if I do a refresh, there is our IP address again. And the reason it assigned that this IP address first is because that's the first available IP address for here. And it's dynamic because it's not a reserved, but we can see that our address pool here is starting at from 10. This is the starting address, 10.0.0.100. If I go to address leases, you can see that it used 110, but it could have used any of the ones. Usually it assigns the first available one. So now we can log into this again. There it is, it's coming. And we can see also on the client 1 that the IP address is there as well. As soon as it loads, I really hope I'm making sense here. There's a lot to absorb here, but it's very useful stuff if you're going to do tech support and to kind of understand how all these things work and how they're all interconnected. All right. And I'm just going to command line, command prompt. This is on the client computer. And we're going to do ipconfig/all. And here's our IP address right here for this computer. All right. Now we can also change this. We can reserve an IP address for this. And this is what you would do for things like printers when you're trying to install a new printer or whatnot. You can reserve an IP address for it, so it's something that stays that IP address all the time. Especially important when you're dealing with printers. That's something that needs to be always the same, that multiple people are accessing. This also goes same for the servers that you're trying to install and access. You don't want that IP address to change, so you're making a reservation and say, I want to reserve this IP address for this computer. All right, so we can do that too, but it's usually done with printers I do not have a network printer, unfortunately, set up here. Let's see. Let me see if I can do it with this virtual machine. I mean, I can find a random MAC address and just make a reservation. That's not a problem. But let me see if I can do it for this one here. The MAC address for this adapter is this here, so where it says physical address. So we can make a reservation for this so it never changes. The reservation is as soon as this computer connects, or any other computer, whether it's printer, I don't know, a camera, IP camera, a phone, like a phone, IP phone or whatever, as soon as it reaches the network, the domain, it will get this reserved IP address for it. And how does it know? Well, we got to give it the MAC address. You got to tell the DHCP server which MAC address is allowed to use this reserved IP address. Again, here it is for this computer. We're going to copy this here. We're going to make an IP reservation for it. We're going to go to the DHCP. Under reservations, we're going to select new reservation. We're going to call it client 1 reservation, and we're going to give it an IP address so that it's very distinct, so you can see. We're just going to say .0, .0, and we're going to make it, let's say 55. Why not? So, but we do need to provide a MAC address. So here it is, and you want to delete all these dashes. We don't want the dashes in here. Matter of fact, when I apply, all these letters that are capital, they're going to be lowercase. We're going to say reservation. Well, let's just do see here. IP reservation for client 1 computer. I mean, as far as we know, this client 1 computer could be used as a server for something. It could just be running an instance of some kind of software that needs an reserved IP address. And we're going to leave it here. The types that are supported, we're just going to say both DHCP and boot TP or boot P or whatever. Doesn't matter. We're going to click add. All right. So here's our reservation for this. And next time we reboot client 1, it's going to get that IP address. So let's go ahead and reboot client 1. We're going to reboot it, and once it reboots, we're going to log into it and see what happened, right? All right, if all goes well, it will work fine. If it doesn't, then it doesn't, I suppose. I mean, again, these are virtual lab computers, so sometimes things don't work properly, but we'll see. All right, we're going to click reconnect. It was just waiting for it to boot up. It's still rebooting. All right, let's log into it. All right. So, yep. Here is our reservation here. Reservations for client 1 is .55. Here's our client 1. It's booting up with a test user 4. All right. Almost there. I may have to release the least IP address that's on it already. Yeah, I probably need to do that actually first. That's okay. Let's see if it actually did it right away. I may have to release that least IP address because it's going to hold on to it for another week. All right. We're going to do IP config all. I don't know. We'll see. No, I guess it did it. So here it is. Here is our reserved IP address. Again, here it is. So we told DHCP server, make sure that this client 1 is using this one, this IP address, for whatever reason is. It could be that you're making this a server or not, doesn't matter. And we're going to go back to this here. Let's see address leases. See, the old one is still here. You can see that it's not connected, but you can still see that this one, it says it's inactive, but it actually is active. So if I delete this, this should be fine. This is the old lease. Otherwise, this would disappear on itself, by itself like a week later. So today is January 28th, and this expires on February 5th. So a week later, this will basically disappear. But again, if you're having trouble reaching things, sometimes if you have multiple IP addresses for the same client, this goes back to our pinging issue, right? Here, let me do it again. So if we go in and ping client 1, you see how it keeps thinking that it's at 110, but it shows it's unreachable right now. That's because this lease is still active up here. And we can fix this by deleting this old lease. Otherwise, it would expire on its own. But we have to do it because we changed the configuration. So that server wouldn't necessarily work. But if we do ping dash A and then do a 10 dot, 0 dot 0 dot 110, there's nothing. It's not going to work because there's nothing else on the network that's using this IP address. So it's going to fail. Otherwise, if this IP address was assigned to another client, it would show up as a different name for that client that's using it. Again, the reason we can't reach it now is because it keeps thinking that that we are at this old lease, and we're going to get rid of that here just as soon as this ping finishes. But when we're going to try a ping dash, and then we're going to type in this .55, and you will see it will come back with client 1. It will tell you that it's actually there. Let me do a refresh over here. I know it says here inactive, but it should show up as active. There it is. So it's gone. It reset itself. So now it's actually at that. Come on, ping. I wish it would finish. Escape. I don't feel like waiting for it. Come on. Sometimes it gets stuck like that. I don't know why. Come on. I know it's not reachable. Destination is it's not there anymore. But look, it went to actually search for it at .6 too. It's got confused really bad. All right. So if I ping now, client 1. Oh no, it's still doing it. Look at that. It still hasn't replicated. This is an interesting thing. It still hasn't replicated over the network that it's using .55. But if we do ping -A, and then we're going to do 10.0.0.55, that's the new IP address, that's the new reserved IP address. Now it's going to come back and say, well, it's used by client 1. Watch. It's thinking about it, but it's going to give that answer. There it is. You see how it came up? Now it knows if we do it like that, if we do reverse lookup. All right. It's easily fixed. I mean, this is going to fix itself. It's going to replicate over it. And yeah, address leases. And if we go to DNS, we can also see what's happening there. We may have to go inside of DNS and also make the changes, because the DNS here still might think that we are there. So we're going to right click, we're going to refresh, and now, well, good thing, yeah, DNS updated properly like it should. But if it doesn't, then there's a problem. See, in DNS actually show it that it's a static, but it's a static lease, or the static entry for that. It's not going to expire. So DNS knows that IP address forwarding to this client, for this client, is not going to expire. So it knows that. This is why it changed it to a static. Again, it's a reserved IP address. It's not a static IP address per se, because they're different, as I've explained already. Every company uses printers. For those reasons, today we're going to learn how to set up a network printer from beginning to an end. It's going to be very easy to understand. Even somebody who just started doing tech support can do it. Let me show you how. From DHCP to DNS, and then all the way to the print server, so we can make sure that this network printer is set up correctly so it can be used on the network by the users within that company. So these are typical settings that you would see within a business that you might get hired to work as tech support. I will also talk about some troubleshooting things you can do after we configure everything and make sure that it's set up correctly. All right, so what you're looking at is some examples of printers, and in this case I'm just going to stick with HP. HP is very common, probably the most common type of printer that you would see in a business environment, but you can also have brands like Xerox, Lexmark, Ricoh, and etc. It's going to be very similar when it comes to the settings and everything else when it comes to configuration, meaning the network setup and all of that. It's going to be identically the same in the sense that when it comes to networking part, there's only one way to do it regardless of what brand printer is. So today we're just going to stick with HP because I already have it there and we're going to look it up. So this is what it looks like. This is a typical, probably an older HP printer. They might look a little bit different with the fancier screens and like this. But one of the first things we're going to do is obviously make sure that this printer is connected to the network with the network cable and making sure that the network connection is enabled, meaning that is patched in, that it has network connection to the DHCP server and the switch itself, right? So make sure there's data connection available there, and of course power it on, make sure it comes on. And the next step is to actually get our configuration page, because we need this configuration page to find our MAC address, also known as physical address and sometimes called a hardware address. The reason we're going to need this is so that we can set up an IP address for this printer, so that way this printer can communicate over the network, over the internet protocol. This is why it's called IP address, internet protocol. So that way the way we're going to do it, we're going to assign an IP address to the MAC address of this printer, right? So it's an example that we're going to talk about here. So we're going to go to the printer itself and we're going to go to the settings. We're going to either look at the network settings or we're going to print the configuration page. So you can go to the printer itself like here, select OK, and then go to the menu, scroll down, find the configuration page, and then select the print it out. So once you print it out, it's going to come out right here, right? It's going to come out and then you're going to look at it. We're going to see what it looks like. So we got a bunch of examples of configuration pages. Sometimes you'll have multiple pages that come up, usually no more than 2, and it would have all the stuff that you might be looking for. So again, we're looking for hardware address. Let me just look for one where I can actually read it. A bunch of these images are blurry, so I apologize for that. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Here's a configuration page. And this looks to be a printer that has wireless capability. Since we're going to physically plug it in, but it's going to be the same for wireless. But in this case, it's going to be wired, right? It's going to be physically connected to the network. We're going to look for hardware address, and it's right there where it says 802.3 wired, and it says here hardware address, also known as MAC address, and here it is. So we're going to make note of that. But if you're going to set this up on a wireless network, here it is. Here's the wireless settings, hardware address for the MAC. All right, so let's take note of this MAC address. I'm just going to type it here. It says 9C. By the way, you don't need the colons that are in between, so you just need to type it as it is without the colons, right? So we're going to do that. So it's B6 54 4D 30, and I think that's EC 544D 30. EC. I typed in ED. All right, so we got our MAC address. Now what's next? What's the next step? Well, depends. Do you want to use a static IP address that's set up on the printer itself? Meaning that you went inside of the settings. For example, if you go to, let's say you manually go inside of the menu. So imagine that this is the menu here, right? If you look over here, you go into the menu, and then you find something that looks like network settings, right? Network setup. You go in and you type in a manual IP address, meaning you're setting up a manually set up static IP address and you want to use that IP address for the printer. So that's one option. You can put it in and then say this is the IP address, and after that, all we have to make sure is that the DHCP server is allowing that static IP address to connect. That means that it's within the range of the DHCP server scope. So that would work fine. But then again, you would have to also make sure that the DNS is set up correctly. So You can do it like that, which is fine, but you can also set it up just to be automatically detected and automatically assigned an IP address, which is done through the DHCP server, right? Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol will give a printer or any other device, as soon as it connects to the network, it will give it a next available IP address because it's dynamic, right? But that's not what we want. We don't want that IP address to change. We don't want it to be dynamic. We either want it to be static, like I've mentioned already. That means you go into the printer and you set it up as a static IP address, or we can reserve an IP address for this printer, which will stay the same no matter what, as long as you don't go inside a DHCP server and delete it at some point, right? But we're going to create an IP address reservation for this printer. So we're reserving that IP address for that printer on the DHCP server so it remains the same. I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I just feel like it's very important to understand the difference. And this video is specifically designed for beginners. So for that reason, once you're inside of the settings, network setup settings, for your printer, whether it's HP, Xerox, Ricoh, whatever, make sure it's set to automatically assign IP address. For example, if you look at the web interface here to the right, you can get inside the web interface as long as you know what the IP address is of the connected device. In this case, printer is connected to the network. If you know what the current IP address is, all you have to do is just type it in up here, just like in your web browser, and should be able to access the web interface. You can see here that it has an option for a manual IP. I'm going to zoom into this as best as I can. The picture is not the best, but you can see that somebody has started to type in a manual IP address. This is that static IP address, and then this is what they want. This is fine. That's their first option. We're not going to do that. We're going to set to automatic IP address because we're going to create that reservation. All right, now that we have our MAC address, we're going to go into the DHCP server. We're going to add a reservation for it. All right, so we're going to go to our admin tools. We're going to go to DHCP server. We're going to make this a little bit bigger here so we can see better, right? Here is our domain controller. All right, we're going to expand this. We're going to select IP version 4. So we're going to select our scope, meaning scope is basically the IP range that's set up for your network. You can have multiple scopes, but in the nutshell, what that means is how many IP addresses are allowed to be controlled or basically be within this scope. It's just a way to organize the network. That's what that is really. But in this case, our IP range is between 10.0.0.100 all the way up to 10.0.0200. And if you create a new scope within here, so if you right click IP version 4 and select to create a new scope, and if you go to the wizard, you can specify what kind of scope would you like, and you can specify the numbers, the naming scheme, whatever it is that you need to do. But what you just need to know right now is these are the IP addresses that are available for us to use. So we're going to have to pick one that we're going to create a reservation for this printer. So right now, let's just look at the things that are connected right now to the DHCP server. Now this is a fresh install and it's a virtual machine setup. So right now we just have one thing that's connected right now, and it's a client computer, and it's a Windows 11 client computer. The reason I know is because that's the only thing that I have running in the background when it comes to the virtual machines. But this is what is connected, and it's using this IP address. It's using the next available IP address, which is 10.0.0.111. All right, how do I know? Well, here is our virtual machine. So this is our Windows 11 machine. So I'm just going to open up a command line, and I'm going to type in ipconfig/all, and here is our IP address, 10.0.0.111. So that's what's being used by this computer currently, right? So that's what's available. How else can you know? You can also look at the identifier. So if, let's say you've connected the printer already, let's say you've connected to the printer already, it would get an automatically assigned IP address, which in this case would most likely be 112. And it would show up as this, but it would have a host name that's reflected within the printer itself. So the printer itself will have a printer name inside, but it will be reflected in here. It would say blah blah blah, and it would say the computer name or the printer name in here. But it would also have another very important identifier, and guessed it, you've guessed it right, it's the hardware identifier. So if I scroll to the right, you can see what the unique identifier is for this Windows 11 computer, and look, that's the MAC address, right? That's the MAC address. Is it this here? No, it's not, because our MAC address is completely different. But if you have connected the printer ahead of time, and it's already connected to the network, so let's pretend this here is here, you can simply right click this here and select add reservation. This would reserve this IP address for this printer only, and no other computer will be able to get that IP address. But since we didn't do that, and that's okay, we're going to create a reservation IP address ahead of time for this printer, so that way when the printer does connect to the network, it's going to give it that IP address that we tell it to, that we want to use. All right, so all I did was just click on reservations down here. Since we don't have any right now, I'm just going to right click the folder here. I'm going to select new reservation. All right, and we're going to name it something that we're going to use as the host name for this printer as well. So what is a host name? It's the computer name. Like for example, the computer I'm using right now is called DC1, and here's just an example of it right now. I did ipconfig / previously. You can see the host name is DC1, also known as computer name. So if I also go to the system itself, you can see the name of this device is DC1, right? So why is this important? Well, we want to know how to identify this printer or any other computer on the network based off of their host name. Now, this is not where you are telling it to use a specific host name, but we're just going to use the same host name that we're going to use on in our DNS setup here, so that way we are organized. So we're going to ahead of time, we're going to come up with the printer name that we're going to use for the network to identify. So we're just going to call it, and you can call it whatever is the naming scheme is within your business. So we're just going to call it printer 1 at HR. So we're going to pretend that it's printer 1 at HR, ATHR. So we're going to use that host name later on our DNS setup. Anyways, don't worry about this too much. I'll explain it further. Let's concentrate on our IP address here. So we're going to use next available IP address, but you can use whatever. If you decide to use 199, that's fine too. But we're going to use .0.0.112. We're going to use that. And then we're going to, guess what? We're going to use our MAC address, so that way we can tell the DHCP server, assign this IP address to this MAC address, to this physical address of this device only. Do not allow any other devices that connect to the network to use this IP address. Only this MAC address. And we're going to type in a description here. We're going to say HP printer located in HR. Located. Did I spell that located? Located in HR. And it says support type here. Just leave it at both. The main one we need here is DHCP, which is fine. We're done here. We're just going to select add. And now when our printer, when it connects with this specific IP address, it's going to get, with this specific MAC address, physical address, it's going to get this specific IP address. We're going to click add. And there it is. Now, if we select on address leases, we can see both show up. However, since it's not connected, our printer is not connected yet, it says inactive. Once our printer is connected, it's going to say active. And if we scroll over, you can see our unique identifier right here. And it's a good thing that we added a description here as well, so later on when you have hundreds of things that are connected here, you can find your way around it. I apologize if I repeat myself sometimes. It's just this video is specifically designed for entry-level people, and it's good to repeat sometimes. This is how we learn things. All right, so we got our IP address for our printer, right? So we're going to do this here. We're going to make sure that we keep track of what we're doing, and we're going to type in the IP address here. This is just for our notes, because we do still have to go to the DNS. And later on, you also might need to do some troubleshooting. So it's good to have this handy and to keep track of it. So this MAC address is going to use this IP address. All right, we are done with DHCP. We're going to minimize all of this. We're going to go open up DNS. We're going to go to our admin tools. We're going to open up a DNS, domain name system. So why do we need to go to DNS? Well, we need to tell the network which host name, which printer name we're going to use to identify it on the network, right? And then we're going to say to DNS, we're going to tell the DNS, hey, this name is actually located at this IP address. So that way we don't have to remember what the IP address is in the future. That's the point of DNS. DNS will take our host name, because host name or computer name or printer name, it's easier to remember than the IP address, because you can have thousands of IP addresses out there. It's easier to remember that. So that way we can add it to computer machines, our users' machines, and this and that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory right there. All right, we're going to go to forward lookup zones because we're forwarding our name to the IP address. That's the whole point of it. We're going to select forward zones. So here's our domain controller. We're going to select forward lookup zones. We're going to expand that like we did so here, and make sure that you're selecting the correct domain that you're going to use this on. If you don't know what that is, if let's say you just started working at some company, then you can ask somebody, what is our domain name, right? And you can also look it up if you look at the system here or through the IP config and all of that. You can see that the domain name here is, well, here's the computer name, and the domain name, well, it used to be here. Advanced system settings, computer name, here it is. DC1 on corp.contoso. This screen used to have this information. I don't know why they removed it, or maybe I'm simply blind to it. Anyways, they keep changing the way things look. Doesn't matter. So here is an example. Remember that client2 that we saw up here? Here it is, client2.corp.contoso, right? We're going to have something else similar show up here once we enter our DNS entry. After this, we're going to have the same thing, corp.contoso, once we set up DNS, because it's all connected. But you can see that it's a .111, and you can see that it's called client2, and you can see that there is a DNS entry for it right here. Now, a lot of these entries, or all of these other entries, are created automatically in DNS. Why? Is because when you join a regular Windows computer to domain, it will automatically create a DNS entry for it. And how does it know to create the client2? Well, that's because that's the name of this Windows 11 machine. You can see here it is. It's called client2. And that's the name of this computer, right? Just like we look at the DC1, if I go to system here, you can see that this one is called client2. So it automatically created this entry for this. That's not the case necessarily with the printers. We're going to have to do it manually. And you can see that this entry, this DNS entry, is pointing to an IP address. So this is what we have to do. So we're going to right click our domain. We're going to select new host A, just like it is over here with these other ones. New host A, that means at. And then we're going to use that same name that we used before. And again, we've done this here just for the sake of tracking, but we're going to use it same as for the host name. So for the DNS. So it's going to be called printer1 at HR. So we're going to name it printer 1 at HR. You can see how this is automatically populating here automatically, just like it's showing here in DHCP for this client too. So you can see how we're manually doing this for the printer, right? You can see how we're manually doing this for printer. Once we update this, this was going to show up the same way. You'll see. All right. You see how it is now? It's populating that. And now we're going to tell it the IP address. And again, our IP address is just .112, right? So we're going to type that in. It's 10.0.0.0.0112. And that's it. So once I click add, it's going to know where this printer needs to be, where this printer name needs to be forwarded to, which IP address. And it's the IP address that we used for its reservation. So we're going to click add. It says host record printer was successfully created. Okay, we're going to select done here. And you can see it how it shows up right now. And it looks similar to these other ones, which is fine. It's just an entry, right? It's just a DNS entry. So we have done this right now. Now we know that this IP address is now using hostname printer 1 at HR. All right, so let's break it down here. So we started from MAC address to creating an IP address and then to creating a host name. Now we can forget about all of this here. We no longer have to worry about it. The main thing right now for us is printer 1 at HR. This is the main thing now for everything else that you do. The main thing. Whether it's troubleshooting, whether it's trying to access it over the web, whether it's trying to add it to another computer as a printer, or whether it's creating it, adding it on the print server, this is the main thing, right? Of course, you can add it by the IP address too in the print server, but let's see what happens. All right, so the next thing is add it onto the print server. So we're going to go to Windows Admin Tools, and we're going to go to Print Management. Now, print servers, I should say, should be on a separate server normally, aside from the domain controller, because I mean, we got the domain controller here that controls DHCP and DNS. You can make all of these separate. I would maybe do a print server separately just from everything else, but you don't necessarily have to, but you can. It doesn't matter. We need to go to the print server, whether it's here or there, it doesn't matter. Open up Print Management, and now we're going to add the printer inside of the print server, so that way later on it can be used as a network printer and added over the network to computers, to the local computers for the people that are using the printers. So here it is. Here is our domain controller. We're just going to make sure that this is expanded right here. We're going to select printers, right? Simple. So from here, we're just going to add a new printer. We're going to right click anywhere on the blank side here. We can right click on the icon itself and select add printer. Here is our wizard, printer installation wizard. So, and here it is, add an app TCP IP. We know it's going to be TCP IP because that's the transmission control protocol over the internet protocol. So this is what we've added, and it says here by IP address or host name. So we're going to leave it at that. We're going to select next because we're going to use IP address or host name. I would prefer to use a host name because this is what we have it set up as. So we're going to type in our host name. Now you can use the IP address that we have here too. You can use the IP address. You can type it in. That's fine too. But we're going to use a printer name here. I'm going to copy that. We're going to select to make sure it's selected as a TCP IP device, right? Make sure it's selected as TCP IP device because it's transmission control protocol or the internet protocol. I wouldn't necessarily have it to auto detect, but it could work just fine. But I'm going to make sure it's selected as TCP IP because I like to have control over it. We're going to type in our host name, and it's going to add the port name automatically. Now, if you add another printer with the same name, it's going to have like _1 like this. that means that you have a duplicate printer name out there. Okay? But if it automatically populates with just that means you're good. You can leave here auto detect the printer driver to use. Let's click next. It's going to try to look for it. It's not going to find it because it's not online, right? So obviously in our case, it couldn't find it because it's not a real printer that we are installing. So I'm just going to scroll through and pretend like it's there. And I'm going to find, let's see, an HP Hewlett Packard single port. Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I had one of these printers. They're super expensive, and I simply can't afford to buy a network printer that I'm not going to use to make a video, a free video. And so we're going to have to work with what we have. So let's see what we can do. At this point, it's asking us for a driver to use, which is fine, which is normal. So I'm just going to leave it at this to see how far we can get. And this is normal, but pretty much normal what would you expect when it comes to installing. I'm going to finish the wizard. I'm going to look at some settings that we can look at. Here it says Microsoft Software Printer Driver. This is what we've installed. So we're going to right click it. We're going to right click it and we're going to go to Properties just to show you where you can make some changes. It's kind of the same thing, but here are things you can do here. You can print test page just to see if it's printing, and you can also go to Advanced and tell it to use specific driver. So if you go to here, and this is going to be, it's going to look the same whether you install HP, Xerox, Ricoh, whatever the printer that you install, it's going to look the same. So you would find it in here, and it's going to be named what we told it to be named, right? In this case, we couldn't do it because obviously I don't have it. But if you go to it, any of these printers, at this point, you can just basically make sure that it's using the correct printer. So if you go printer driver, you go to the advanced, and you can change it. Because you can have, for HP, for example, you can have different versions of the drivers. They all going to show up here. And if you want to use a different version of it, you can certainly use it. For example, there are some generic ones, there are some different version ones, this and that. And that's great. Another thing to consider here is ports. You can see that right now it's using a port. What is this for? What this is used for is for local printing, right? And you can see that right now we're using that port for that name, right? So it's pointing to that printer that we've set up. It says printer 1 at HR, and that's fine. But if your printer stops working, let's say there's something wrong, and you want to route the printer and only local print, meaning like Microsoft Print, regular print that you use from your computer. And the reason I'm talking about that, because some software, for example, that's, I don't know, I work right now in a healthcare type of business, and they have specific software that they use to print patient information and stuff like that. Those print jobs have to be highly secured, and they're done completely differently, and they have to be forwarded to the printers in a specific way, and that is completely separate from Windows Print. This is Windows Print. Something like that is completely separate, and that has to be configured somewhere else. Anyways, not to confuse you here, if this printer is not working and you wanted to forward print jobs that normally go to printer 1 at HR, if you had a printer 2 at HR and that is working, all you have to do is just go to ports here and select printer 2 at HR. So you would find printer 2 in here, right? You would look for it. Where's printer 2? Printer 2. Find it and then select it and say, okay, now I want you to forward those print jobs to that other printer. As a temporary solution, you can certainly do so. Right now, this is a port, right? Like so, this is a printing port. It's printing right now to that, right? So this is all related to the network and the way network handles print jobs, and it handles print jobs based off the printer name. All right, so we're gonna leave it at this. So now, if you go to a client machine and you want to add this network printer, everything else is ready. You just go to printers and scanners, add a device, right? So this is just done through, this is just how Windows 11 Similarly to Windows 10, you can select, and you will look for them, right? Then it will list all available printers that are available in your network, but you can have like 1,000 of them if it's a big company. But as soon as you get this pop-up that says the printer I want isn't listed, you can say add manually, right? So what kind of printer it is, right? Remember, we've done all this. We're going to select add a printer using an IP address or host name. So we can use either that IP address or host name, but we already have set up host name correctly through the DNS, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to select TCP IP. You can leave this to auto detect as well, but it doesn't matter. And so we're going to type in our printer name, right? And we can leave this query printer to automatically select the driver. We're going to select next. It's going to try to connect to it, and I hope it works. It may not work here, but this is how you would add this printer to be used to those people in HR, right? And once it finishes, it's either, so just like over there, it couldn't find it, and we're gonna try to trick it into adding this thing. And unfortunately, yeah, again, I know I said this already, I don't have the actual printer, but let's say this thing is not working again, you can go back to the print server and just look up that printer and say, hey, why isn't this working? That's okay, I'm gonna forward the print jobs to another working printer, and all you have to do is just go to ports and tell it, okay, all these jobs that are being sent to printer 1 at 8 at HR, send them and forward them to this other, and you just select different port, meaning different printer, select OK, and then it's going to be doing that. Okay, so that's one way to troubleshoot this and to temporarily resolve issues. Let me just see if it actually did anything over here on the client side. It doesn't. Yeah, it's just use this generic. Sure, whatever. Let's just add it in there. Do not share. Finish. Okay, so it's added on here. You can see it. It's right there. And again, if it's not working, it'll say it's offline or online. Well, it says idle here. Sure, whatever. Okay, so what's another thing we can troubleshoot here? So now we're at the troubleshooting part of it. Now we know how to install and configure a network printer. That's all done unless you're using custom software, custom proprietary software that needs to be configured a specific way to route those print jobs to this Windows-based printer. Unless you have a specific software that needs to be configured and set up to route. For that, you would need some kind of a third-party print server that handles forwarding print jobs to this. And that's way more advanced, and I could certainly talk about this. But for example, just Google healthcare or something like that, and you would see what kind of software that they're using for their patient information. That type is very specific, and that needs to be configured in such way. But as somebody who's doing entry level, you don't have to worry about this. As far as you know, this is it. This is it for regular Windows print jobs. There's nothing else that you need to worry about. Now you know how to install this. And another troubleshooting thing, you can see there's a job queue. You will see what print jobs are being held up. So if there is a job that's being held up, just like on your Windows, you can open up print queue, and if there's something held up, you can go in here in the print server and just right click these and just delete them or whatever else, you know. So there's your troubleshooting part of it. Now what else can we talk about? Well, let's talk about Windows interface since I'm here already. Here's an example of web interface. So you can access this printer now by using that host name. So if I just go to my web browser and type in https:// and that printer name, and I hit enter, I will be able to access that network interface. Obviously it's not online, so I'm not able to do it now. But this is all you need. This is all you need to access the web interface, which looks just like this. For the HP, right? It looks just like this. So this is the web interface, and within this interface, you can do some settings control. Instead of doing it, this is remotely, you can do this. You don't have to go to the printer itself. And there are a lot of things in there, like for example, tray settings and this and that. But if DNS is broken, if what we did for DNS is broken, then you can type in the IP address if you really wanted to. So again, this is the point of DNS. You don't have to remember these IP addresses to figure this out, right? But if you wanted to, you can do that and hit enter, and it's going to go to that web interface for that printer. Whether it's HP or any other brand, it works the same way, right? Unless it's some crazy wild new printer company that decided to do it differently. All right. So once you go to the web interface, make sure you log in as admin. Otherwise, your changes won't work. But let me see if I can find anything that's in here. Anyways, let me just, I'm going to zoom into this here. But if, for example, if you select like home here, you'll have tray settings. Like let's say there's some custom tray settings that you need to do for like labels or specific things that you need to do. You can go in there and customize these, and there's a lot of useful stuff here. I wish I could show you this stuff, but I just don't have access to it. All right. So in this video, I'm going to go through all the steps. I'm going to show you what it takes to enable and create a shared mapped network drive. You can see that I have the C drive, and then here there is nothing, right? There is no other drive. Well, this is going to change when we create our map network drive. And we're going to set it up so that it automatically installs when a user or person logs into their computer. So right now we only have the C drive. Later on we're going to create it and set it up so that it automatically adds these drives for the people that log into the computer. So the first step is making sure that you have enough drive space on your server. So log into your server, check to see what kind of hard drive space you have. You're going to have to dedicate some space for it, specifically for the shared drive. All right, so I'm going to keep it step by step, and you can follow along on your computer too. If you need a lab, which is what I'm using right now, this is a lab specifically from Microsoft. I have a video on how to set this up specifically, so if you want to follow along, just let me know in the comments and I will gladly send you the link to that video. It will show you step by step how to install this, so that way you can follow along if you need to. But again, you can follow along with majority of these things when it comes to just having your own Windows operating system computer. So if you have Windows computer, you can follow along. First thing first, we need to make sure that on our server, right now I'm logged into the server that I'm going to use for file and sharing services. So right click the start menu, select disk management, and this will basically allow us to make sure that we have enough space to create this volume. We're going to create a specific volume, or a drive if you will, if we only have a single drive. What this means is that we just want to have a dedicated place where we're going to store these shared folders, shared mapped network drives. Okay, in this case we only have a C drive with looks to be 304 or almost 305 gigabytes of capacity. You can see here, but normally you would have multiple drives here, right? Because it's a server, but that's okay. We're going to use this drive to begin with, and we're going to create some unallocated space. As you can see here, there is some already unallocated space, and we can use this to create another letter drive. So instead of C, we can make it whatever we want. But if we want to use some of the space that's already available to us on the C, and normally you wouldn't do this on a C drive, but in this case this is a lab, right? And we don't have any other drives that are in here. But just for the sake of learning, we're going to use a C drive, but normally you would use another physically installed drive on the server. If you had another disk here, it would be a disk 1, 2, and 3, and etc. But this is what we have. This is what we're going to use. If I want to free up some of the space, you see here that it says 293 gigabytes free of 305. If I wanted to use some of this space as a drive, then I can certainly do that. So right click your drive, so Windows C in this case, select shrink volume, and then in the next menu we're going to tell it how much to shrink it by, and it says enter the amount of space to shrink. We're only going to shrink it down by 100, roughly 100,000 megabytes, which is roughly 100 gigabytes, not exactly, but let's just do that to make it simple. So we're going to basically shrink it down by this much, which is going to be roughly 100 gigabyte drive, and this is basically roughly what we need, right? So let's select shrink after we specified how much we wanted. Now we're going to have that extra unallocated space. If you paid attention earlier, you've noticed that this unallocated space was only around 200, and now it's around 300 something, right? So that's okay. From this unallocated space that we've freed up, you can see that we have capacity now of 207 gigabytes on the C drive because we've taken away some of that free space, right? And this is what we're going to use it for in our drive. So right click the unallocated space, select new simple volume, go to the menu, select next, and I'm going to only specify, like I said, I only want to use 100 gigabytes, roughly. And a letter that I'm going to assign to it will be, let's say, I. Let's use the I. Well, let's make it H, actually. Let's make it H and select next. Select next, but make sure you label the volume. In this case, I'm going to label it as finance shared drive, just so we stay organized. You can leave the file system to NTFS and everything is default here except for the volume label. Select next, select finish. This is just to confirm what you've done. And now we have another drive here. Okay, let's go to our drives. Select this PC and we can see that our finance share drive is here and it's under H. And you can see down here that we still have 206 gigabytes of unallocated space that we can play with. And here's the one that we've just created. Okay, so the whole point of this is just to create another drive that we can use as a file storage for our finance group department. Okay, the first step is done. I can just close this. I'm done with this. Now let's open up our server manager right now. If you had it previously open, make sure you close it and reopen it so we can refresh the new volume, the new drive to show up. And here is our file and storage services running down here. Select on that, select under volumes here, select disks, and now on the bottom we can see that our H drive has appeared. So with our shared drive available now we can start to create a shared managed drive. So with H there selected, right click it with your mouse, right click it, select new share, and this will initiate a wizard, new share wizard. The point of this is so that way you can manage your share in many different aspects. And it tells you here's the very first one that it says this is basic profile represents the fastest way to create an SMB file share, and it tells you here what it is. It's typically used to share files within Windows-based computers, and it says suitable for general file sharing. And then you have advanced options that can be configured later using the properties dialog. And this is very important. Otherwise, I can just go to any drive that is available on the server. I can go to any drive that's available on the server and just add people to it and then tell them to link to it. For example, here's our drive that just appeared, right? Here's our shared drive. So, if I just wanted to share it with, without basic any management, without any advanced features, I can just right click and go to properties, go to sharing and just create a shared path and then just add people to it. That's certainly an option, but you won't be able to measure you won't be able to manage the advanced features that the file sharing and storage service provides for you. And if you wanted to look at the ones that are NFS ones, the only difference is that these are typically used to share files with Unix-based computers, right? So what we just want the regular one, which is the SMB share. And of course, we can select the advanced because if we want to set up advanced features, but let's keep it simple. So SMB share quick. So right now we're configuring this. And right now you can select, volume again here where it says share location. We already selected H, which is fine. We're going to use H. And then here it tells you here that it's online. Here it tells you, the server name, and then it tells you it's online. And then it says it's not clustered. What does that mean? But that means that it's not clustered, meaning that there is no other version of it on the network somewhere. Typically, when you cluster servers, that means that you have another server of the same type that is basically a copy of it that is used for redundancy, meaning that for backup. In case one server goes down, then you'd have another server that you can just turn back on, that you turn on or fail over to use it. If the one server goes down, then you'll have another server that has the same copy of it. And if it's set up in clustering like that, that means that other server will constantly basically make a copy of itself. Okay, I'll leave it at that. This is fine. We have H selected for our volume. Select next. Share name. And we can create this just to be a entire share for the whole finance department. But I actually want to use this shared drive for multiple departments, because finance department doesn't necessarily need the whole drive, right? The whole virtual drive. Later on, we're going to specify a folder specifically to be used by finance department. For those reasons, we're going to name this share name as in shared network folders, because we're going to have multiple folders in there in case we want to add other departments to it. Make sure that your folder architecture is set up correctly. Notice in this video, when I name a shared folder certain way, there's actually wrong way of going about this. You shouldn't have any spaces because it's going to mess up our script that we create later on, the post logon script. For the description, same thing. And here is a local path to the shared. That means that where is this located specifically on our computer, right? On our computer locally. We can see that it's H. So if I go back to our new created drive, it's going to be inside of this. It's going to create a folder called shares, and then it will be another folder within it called shared network folders. Right now it's blank, but we'll go back to it so that way you can see that it actually pops in there. Now, if I wanted to add this folder or this network drive directly to some other computer, here's the path to it. This is the path to it. This is what I would use to connect to it. So this is the part that we are done with. So select next. Okay, next. Select next. And here we can add custom permissions. These are all, and this is what you want to make sure that it's set up correctly. You want to make sure that administrators have full access to it. This is not the point where you would start adding users and people just to use regular computers into. This is what you just want to kind of leave a default for now to keep things simple. But this is basically just for administrators to have full access to it in case they need to make changes. All right, next. And this is just the kind of overview of what we're doing. And we're going to select create to finalize our setup. All right, now it's completed. Now remember what I told you, that those folders will appear inside of the H drive, and here they are. Here is shares, and here is shared network folders. Since I've changed my mind and not actually want to use this entire drive for the finance department, I'm going to rename this to just shared folder when it comes to the volume to stay organized. And it's okay to change your mind, right? It's okay to change your mind. And as long as nothing is being implemented yet, you're just kind of setting things up, then it shouldn't be a problem to change these things. It shouldn't break anything, but if it does, then, then you may have a problem, right? Then we can fix it. Now it's just named shared drive. Okay, now let's go inside of it. Shares, shared network folder, and inside let's create a folder called finance. Okay, this is going to be our finance folder, but you can imagine that in here we can add other folders. For example, HR, human resources. We can add another folder called, let's say, marketing, and etc. Right? We can have in one folder here that's just called IT, whatever else that you want. In this case, we're going to stick with finance, but this just gives you an idea that all of these shared network paths are going to be within the same drive. Okay, I hope this is easy to follow so far. Also, make sure that you set up a backup. So for that, we need to create shadow copies. Okay, next obvious step is to create automated backup. Automated backup, and for that we're going to use built-in Microsoft Windows Server setup. It's called shadow copy. So our share drive is right here, H. Right click it with your mouse, select configure shadow copies to create our backups just in case somebody deletes something or the whole thing disappears. We can have a copy created. And it says here select the volume. So what do you want to make shadow copies of? And we have H, right? So we're going to select that and select settings. If you just select enable, it tells you here it's just going to use the default settings, which is not necessarily what we want. This is going to vary on your business because you don't want to start making copies of entire drives while in the middle of the day, right? You don't want that to happen or at the beginning of the day. So for those reasons, select settings and we're going to specify what we want to use. And then it tells you where do you want your storage area to be. And we don't have another drive here that's selected. And that's okay. We have that other unallocated space that we can use as a backup. So go back to our disk management. Let's create another drive. Again, unallocated space that we have. So we have free space, new simple volume, and specify the same size. This is what I'm going to do here. So 100,000. Okay, so it's 1 for 1. Letter, sure. Let's actually use it letter B for backup, so it's easy to remember. New volume, backup, call it backup, finish. Okay. Now we can select our B. Let me just refresh this here actually, go back to settings. And now we can select the B drive for backup. I'm going to set it to no limit because it's the exact same size, so I wanted to use the full available space that is there. Select schedule, and by default it's set at 7 a.m. every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday of every week if you have it select to weekly. And that's fine if this is when you want to make these changes. However, you can change this too, and I highly recommend that you do, to something that's outside of work hours. So for example, 2 a.m. here, I'm going to select OK because I'm happy with that. Select OK, and now it's going to create backups, scheduled backups every week as indicated. Okay, select OK. Now we have automated backups. It's also very important that you set up a group within Active Directory that will control the access to this shared. All right, so the next step is to add access to this drive. Now that we've created a backup, now we need to give access to the people that need it, in this case, finance people. Here is our properties of our drive. If you go to Security tab, you can see who all has access to it. And if you select Edit, you can add and remove. Here I'm going to remove everyone because I don't want everyone to have access to it, although these controls are not even set for them. I will, however, leave administrator, which is GW1 administrator. GW1 / administrators are the local administrators for this server. The name of the server is GW1. So the computer name for this server is GW1. And the same thing for GW1 users. These are not domain users. I will leave that as it is, which is fine. Select add. And I'm going to make sure that this here is available where it says corp.conteso.com. This is the name of our domain. I want to pull domain users, and I'm going to assign an administrator to this, and it's going to be called lab admin. But if you want to assign administrator, you can add him in there. And here's a lab admin. This is a domain-based administrator that I'm going to give full control of this. Apply, and you can see that it's you can see that this lab admin login is part of the domain because it says corp instead of GW1's corp. I'm going to leave it at this here, and we're going to switch to our domain controller. Let's go to Active Directory users and computers. Okay, and our corp, you can see that it says corp.conteso. This is our domain. Select corp OU, and we don't have a finance group in here, so I'm going to create an OU that's called finance. Okay, organizational unit, finance. Okay, Finance is empty right now. In here, right click inside, new group, domain. I'm going to leave it at domain and security group. Group name, finance department H drive access. You can name it whatever you want. This is just for the organizational sake. Okay, and for this specifically, I'm just going to add access. I'm going to allow access to this entire group to that shared location that we've created. If you don't set up the permissions in this way, then you're going to have a hard time trying to grant access to anybody. If you make it available in AD, anybody with access to AD should be able to change access, remove or grant access as needed. Okay, and now we need to give access to it. And I have to make slight adjustment. I know I gave access to the lab admin to the shared drive itself directly. So this is for the entire shared drive. We have lab admin, so you can administer that. But for this specifically, we are going to grant access to that folder only for HR finance, I should say. So go to folder specifically, finance. If we want finance people to only have access to this, go to security, add, type in finance or whatever the full name is if you want, but it will find it. Finance department drive, department H drive access. Select OK. I'm going to make it so that it's not just read and execute, but also modify, so they can create their own folder in there. Select OK. Select OK. So just to reiterate, I've given access to the lab admin to this entire shared drive, which has ability to make changes to all of these individual folders, which are going to be for the finance department, and only access to the finance folder for that group that we've created, only to this. Okay, so the point of it is, you can see now that if I go all the way back, that finance is not going to appear here on the top level of this, because they don't need access to the whole thing, only lab admin here, the administrator. But if I go back here, finance folder specifically, that group has access to it, as you can see here. Okay, so now that's done. But now anybody, maybe even somebody who does help desk who has like tier 2 or tier 3 access, they can go to AD. They can go to Active Directory and just search for a person, right? They can just search for a person. They can go to users, obviously, and find the person in there. But if they say, if somebody is requesting access to the finance department, it has to go through their manager to get approved, right? But let's say Maria is now part of finance department. We can search for Maria in here, double click her, go to member of, and if we make her a member of that finance department, then she'll be able to have access to that. So that finance group that we've created, there it is. Select apply. Now Maria has the same access as this entire group. So you don't have to go to the file server that we've just been in previously and do all of this on the folder level. You just do everything through Active Directory. Okay? Now Maria has access to this. Okay? Maria has access to this, and we can add more people to it, right? And you can do it the same way if I, for example, just look for that group. If I just search for the group, right? Here's finance department group. And if I go to it, and don't be confused about this, it's just a different way of doing this. We've just added Maria as a member of this group, as this security group. And if we select members right here, there she is. So if I want to add more people in here, I can certainly do. So for example, let's type in Norton. Or specify somebody's full name. Edward. There's Edward Norton. Okay, we can add him in there as well. So now Edward also has access to this, assuming that they're both part of finance department, that it's approved by their manager. All right. So how does this look like for the person that just got access to this? Well, let's first of all make sure that we have a path to this, that we have a sharing path. And if you go to properties and sharing, you can see what the path is, network path to this drive. So if I go to a client computer, just a regular computer that's part of the main, and I sign in as Maria, which might give me an error now. Yeah, it is. The sign in remotely. This here, it says that she doesn't have remote desktop access, which is fine because the way these virtual machines work, they're basically remote desktop sessions. I'm not literally in front of the computer because it's all virtual. But all we have to do is open up the main controller, find Maria in here. No, I'm sorry, find the name of the computer that Maria is trying to access. In this case, the name of the computer is Client 1. As you can see here, Client 1. And I can search for that computer, find, change this to Find Computers, Client 1, find, and I can manage this computer remotely. So if I right-click this name of this computer and select Manage, I can grant her access to that computer as a remote desktop user. Now it's connecting right now, and it's going to error out. It's going to say, oh, it doesn't work, but it's actually working. It's just the way this lab is set up. But normally you wouldn't have any errors like we're going to see right now. But either way, it's going to be fine. You'll see. And you can do this on the local computer too, but you have to log into that Client 1 as an administrator. But since we're already logged in as administrator to our Actor directory, we can just do this. And here's the pop-up that came up in the background. Although it said it was an error, but it actually worked. You can see right now that we're doing a computer management of Client 1, which is that computer that's on our domain. We're basically making changes to it locally. And the reason we want to make changes to it locally is because locally we gotta tell the computer that this person is allowed to use remote desktop session, which is the error that we've gotten. So local users and groups, remote desktop users, and we can see that I already have some in there from previous videos if you want to check those out as well. I'm going to add Maria there. This is just so we're fixing that error. This is not required for it to work when it comes to the shared drive. I'm just adding her just so we can log in. Okay. Now here we are, Maria C. And there it goes. Now we've told that computer that Maria is allowed to log into this computer using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Okay, so it's separate from what we were doing, but that's okay. It's a good learning opportunity. And we now have access. We're going to log in as Maria in here so that we can access that shared drive. Okay, while this is loading, let's again get the copy of this location, and we're just going to plop it in there, and just so to show you that she has access to it immediately after she logs in. And here it is, it's almost there. So if I go to File Explorer and just paste that in there, if I just paste that in there and I hit enter, you can see that I've pasted. You can see that I already found it actually. And if I hit enter, now I have access to that finance folder. You can see it right here. Here's the path, and I'm inside of that folder. So if I go in and I select new, and let's say text document, and just say Maria C created this, okay, and go back to our server. Let's go back to our server and go inside of finance. We can see that it popped in immediately. But it's not mapped. This drive is not mapped to her. I mean, as long as she has a path to it, she can always get to it because she has access. But it's not added. There is no H drive in here, right? There is no H drive in here. And you can add it manually in here by selecting the three dots. And in Windows 10, it's right up here to add a network drive. And you can add it as a network location or as a network drive. So if I just do this, map a network drive, and if you're doing this manually, make sure you specify the same letter that everybody's using. So H, and then paste that location in there, right? And leave it here where it says reconnect at sign in. Now, if they're using specific credentials, make sure that you specify this here, but this, don't worry about that right now. This is not how this is set up. And if I select finish, it will pop in and then you'll have an H drive right there. But we don't want that. We don't want to have to do this manually every time. What we want to do is create a PowerShell script that will do this for us automatically. Okay? Now, I will do this and it's going to be great. Every user that is logging into these, it's going to automatically create this, and this is going to be in the next video. All right? So I apologize. I wanted to make it right away, but I will create it in the next video. So be sure to subscribe, like, leave a comment, and then I will show you how to create a PowerShell script, configure it so that it automatically do all this for every user that's part of that group. I hope this video is very educational and easy to follow. Thank you so much for all your support. Please also share it with friends that might need this type of education, free education. All right. This is real world examples, real world experience. Thank you very much. And I will release the second part within a week from this video. I hope you like this video. I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.